we need to learn from other industries, and there's always concepts which can be borrowed, and there are a lot of innovation which happens at that intersect, and that opened our journey with Shell.
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Applied Tech series. UpTech Report is sponsored by TerraLeap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. Today, I'm joined by my guest, Srikanth, who's based in Houston, Texas. He's the co-founder and chief customer officer at Flutura. Welcome, Sri. Good to have you on.
Thank you, Alex. Nice to meet you.
Now, understanding Flutura, an industrial AI company, you're focused on yield, uptime, and net zero outcomes for the industrial industry. This started, though, back in 2012. The three of you, you and Krishnan and Derek, co-founders, you actually started the coffee, if I understand correctly, with Robert Patterson, the CTO for Shell. Can you describe, take me back to that moment for the concept of this, where it began?
Sure. Alex, I've been in the industry for almost 25 years and have been in the data analytics space and machine learning. And 2012, when we started, we decided we need to take an adventure on our own. And we saw a lot of possibilities when it comes to innovation and adoption in machine learning, right? And, we used to write a lot of blogs and ideas for the industry. And so one of the gentlemen from Houston, picked up one of the blogs and said, hey, you know what, Shell is interested in hearing about your idea. Would you like to, come and share your idea and thoughts with them?
How did he come across your blog? Were you just already well known in the space?
No. So we are not Steve Jobs or we don't have that background, right? So it was just someone on LinkedIn. They picked up the thought paper which we had written, and then so then we decided we were deciding whether it should be me or Krishnan or Derek to take this meeting. We didn't have any oil and gas experience when we started the company. So I was a little nervous, meeting and with Shell, what do I talk and how do I share this idea? So then, so we decided it's going to be me who's going to take the beating from Shell. And I met Robert in Houston, and it was a fantastic conversation I had. And people who know Robert would obviously know he's one of the best visionaries in the industry. Mm-hmm. And through that conversation, the first disclaimer I told Robert is, I have no idea about oil and gas. But he said, we need to learn from other industries, and there's always concepts which can be borrowed, and there are a lot of innovation which happens at that intersect, and that opened our journey with Shell. And he shared a lot of problems which the energy industry faces, and especially they work on very mission critical facilities, right? And he said Mother Earth, it actually extracts the oil and gas which is extracted from Mother Earth comes at 15,000 psi of pressure, which is mind-boggling. You can't even imagine the pressure at which, and look at how we have designed systems to manage that pressure, and that's how it started. Then we went on that journey. We understood the market well, and sometimes people actually think that I'm actually from I'm an oil man.
But it was all happenstance because of a cup of coffee. Now I'm wondering, what was the paper on? What was the blog post that captured his interest?
So the blog post was around, how do you manage large volumes of data and scientifically pick exceptions from the data to influence business outcomes. So we had written a thought paper in terms of how do you even think about managing and in a structured way, use data for influencing better outcomes. That's how it was.
And it came from your previous experience of in this space, and then that just happenstance or just a meeting of minds that he comes across that and says, wow, we're in that same, or we need to be thinking about this. And it was probably...
That's a nice question, Alex. In fact, Krishnan, Derek, and me were part of a company called Mindtree. And our last stint at Mindtree was, we were part of the team which built Aadhaar platform, which is basically the citizen repository for the government of India. So you can imagine a billion population, and it's like the SSN in US, but imagine an SSN platform in India for a billion citizens. So it's a massive ecosystem where, so that's where we got exposed to very complex systems, very large volumes of data, and you can imagine the possibilities around this. That's been our exposure.
And then that's where you didn't come from a background of oil and gas and energy, but the underlying challenge of what do you do with lots of data and using machine learning, that's what you're translating across. Now, going forward from here, your first year, if I understood correctly, was still a year of discovery and a lot of discussions with engineers in the oil and industrial space, right? Already from that point?
Yes. So one of the good things we did, Alex, is we were open to learning. We didn't. One good thing about the three of us is we don't have a strong bias towards certain solutions or certain aspects, because in this field, a lot of things are evolving and you have to learn every day. And that's exactly what we did. So, we met people. Robert had introduced us to some of his colleagues, and we actually, started to grow our network within Houston. And it's mind-boggling. I don't know whether you have visited Houston. A city which I think it has the densest population of Fortune 500 companies in the world. So it's much easier, right? As a startup, you don't have too much money, so there's no travel expense. So you just be in Houston and just talk about visiting every road one step at a time and visiting all the companies you see that. That's, literally we did that. We drove around Houston and picked which are the companies we need to be speaking to.
Seriously, you drive around and you say, oh, there's a company, we'll just start knocking on doors. That's how it happened?
Yeah, that's how we learned the ecosystem. And the first 6 months was a lot of intense learning. And I think that's the one which we learned a lot in terms of the various industry problems. And thereon it boiled down to which one do we pick and solve.
How did you get those conversations when you just walk in and say, I'd love to talk to your engineers here and see what kind of challenges you have? And you started that way?
I think mostly referrals really help. You make friends and you build a trust, and you don't try to sell anything. So the first thing was, we used to go and say, we are not here to sell, we are here to learn. And the other aspect is, many of the companies would also want to learn from other companies, right? I think that's the biggest human motivation. What is my competitor doing? That question. So you use that as one of the core aspects, saying that, I've learned from some of your competitors in the industry, love to share thoughts, exchange ideas. And that's how it worked. People do. And you will be surprised, Alex, if very often we do have our own biases where we think that people don't help. But if you're genuine and you say that that's your intent and you seek help, you'll get it in many ways.
If you think of the last 9-10 years since you started, one of the highlights, and that was maybe one of the best moments or times so far that really shone out for you, what comes to your mind?
Highlights, I think, when we started the company, in fact, we didn't have a name for the company. So we actually, so as soon as we decided to start a company, it was natural to us saying, it has to be something to do with the transformation which we see in nature, right? From a caterpillar to a butterfly. So we said, it has to be around trust and transformation. And it took us really a long time, 6 months, to give a name to the company. And by the time, we didn't stop focusing on meeting customers and so on. And one of those days we landed in a situation where we had a contract on hand, but we didn't have a name for the company to sign the contract against. And we were forced to choose a name in 2 days. We put it on Facebook and requested our friends to share ideas, and Flutura name was actually came from one of those Facebook surveys we did. And that was a very memorable event for me. Second thing is obviously meeting Robert Patterson was definitely the inflection point, I would say. Yeah. If we had not met a visionary like him, it would have been difficult for us. It would have taken longer time to go in the right direction, right?
Not a lot of startups can have that same type of initial experience to kick off their company.
That's right. And the same journey. We used to write a lot on LinkedIn and some of the blogs. And through that, again, our first investor also reached out to us. He was also our ex-customer, the former customer of ours. He said, you are doing something interesting. Can I invest? And then our first investor, Hive, who are based in Palo Alto, and they also have a franchise in Mumbai. They came and said, your company looks interesting. Can we invest? So I think the first struggle in terms of raising money was not that difficult for us. Thankfully, if I reflect back, I think we are blessed to have some of this. But I think there are ways in which you can, if the ideas are worth it, I'm sure there are people who would definitely want to invest.
I feel like the mix of success here comes from you had some good ideas. Obviously, if you didn't write good content, people wouldn't care. But it's a mix of writing good ideas, getting it out there, and then having the network that at least someone who knows someone is sharing that content and being able to get that initial buzz going.
That's right. And obviously, winning Shell as a customer, we won. I think the third important milestone was our first investor. It's always a sweet one. The next inflection point was basically winning Shell as an account. We won against 14 companies, very large ones. And, the customer, in fact, our customer, Scott Blankard, he was also he was the person who gave us the opportunity to work with him. And in fact, last week, we also signed him as our strategic advisor. He retired from Shell and now he's part of the advisory board. And I asked him, why did you give us that opportunity to work with you? So one of the things he said is, he has met many companies in our space, in the industrial AI and industrial IoT space. Obviously, you can imagine the number of companies who aspire to have Shell as their customer. He said, we were the only company which did not try to sell licenses to him, but to actually really cared about the business problem we wanted to solve for him. That's the feedback. That's what I learned from him.
Interesting.
It's always good to ask your customers who have given you an opportunity to ask why they chose you, and your biggest differentiators would actually come from there.
That is a powerful insight right from there, that how you talked to him, how your conversation was led. It was not focused on, now, would you like to get a license here for this? It was just, let's focus on the problem and help find a solution.
That's right. That's right. We empathize with his pain and problem. Mm-hmm. And we continue to do that.
Now, speaking of the pain itself, we mentioned at the beginning, your focus on industrial by using AI there, but helping with yield, uptime, and net zero outcomes. I imagine, yes, uptime is key, and that's what you've been focusing on, but kind of landing on the last one, net zero outcomes. In green is obviously always been a topic, but it's not decreasing, it's only increasing. How is it over the time? Has it always been all three of those, or has it kind of changed and morphed of the importance and priority that's put on one of those pieces?
Yeah, the first one was the net zero. We basically added it in the last 6 months. It is, but we are, and the primary reason is tying back to the customer pains and the problems which is relevant to be solved. and I don't know, like the last 4 weeks, in fact, has been even more dramatic when when you see the focus in terms of net zero, right from the investor ecosystem in terms of how the overall allocation of funds globally is going to happen. Big investors like BlackRock, for example, clearly have stated their intent, saying that they would they would be investing in companies who are really focusing on sustainability as one of the core drivers. Otherwise, companies don't get investments.
So it's like from investors first, already saying we're not going to invest unless this is a priority.
Absolutely. I think the next thing which would happen is I can see governments becoming more. I think the citizen movement is going to become more, I think many companies really have to take that seriously. And the third is obviously, I think there are a couple of things. I think if you look at all the industries globally, I think the transportation and mobility space is the one which is dramatically going to change. And if you look at the overall emissions, transportation contributes to almost 20% of the emissions. And if you look at electric vehicles, look at the trends. I look at how it's going to change our lives. You and me would be traveling in different ways in the next 10 years, guaranteed. And that is going to drive how the other industries, it's going to have a cascading effect in terms of how other industries would be aligned. And especially the energy industry, so the demand comes down, energy companies will have to start looking at different. So clearly net zero is
transportation.
Yeah, I think it's going to affect every single industry, and it gives us a good adjacency to scale for Flutura in the future.
It has been, I remember in several conversations with the focus of electric vehicles or other types of movements that, okay, now not as much gas and other types of use. So that is going to, as you mentioned, a ripple effect. How have you seen then energy companies, are they already planning for that? Are they already like looking at things differently?
It is, you'd be surprised to know every conversation of mine, customers are asking, hey, have you guys done anything on net zero? And I'm not saying it, I'm experiencing it day in, day out. Last 4 weeks, especially, have been dramatic in terms of these conversations. Yes. They are invest, for example, they are looking at solutions where I think the first step is, and there is an urgency to it, Alex. That's what I'm seeing. There's a lot of urgency. Just today, if you look at it, most of the companies have to file their emission reports and ESG compliance reports once a year, and that is not going to help, because at the end of the day, when it's not mere reporting or complying to regulatory requirements, they have to take some serious actions where the emissions are really brought down. That means that infrastructure changes has to happen, solutions where they get visibility into where emissions are happening, and also in terms of predicting, if there's any issue in the plants, which is leading to emissions. So I think they are looking at solutions overall across the ecosystem.
That recent Shell court ruling that the focus on, as you mentioned, government is coming from one side, investors from another. Your angle at looking at this is, okay, how can we use technology to help facilitate that outcome? Where does technology really come into play then, versus simply just changing the processes and et cetera? Is it just managing and knowing what is going on? Is it just more visibility that technology allows?
Multiple things. One is you need to understand the source of emissions, right? The first, that's, before you even try to fix things, you want to know where things are gone, or I wouldn't say going wrong, but it's more of which sources of emissions do they have to plug within their facilities. And the second thing is, so I don't know whether you've read about it. So broadly, there are Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, which every company has to think about. Scope 1 is their own contribution to the emission, which they need to cut down. The second one is more to do with their dependency on other companies, like they might be purchasing electricity, or they may be purchasing water. So that means that how do you reduce the consumption of some of those aspects into their business, and hence reducing the scope 2. Scope 3 is overall as a company, how does the product which they produce, which gets consumed by you and me, how is that affecting the emission? So broadly, if you look at it, companies have to address all these 3 dimensions. You can imagine, for example, let's say you produce tomato sauce, for example, for a lack of a better example. So that means that you would buy tomatoes, and to grow a tomato, a farmer uses chemicals. So the chemical gets manufactured somewhere. So you can imagine the supply chain of the cause and effect relationship, which a single company has on the environment. So you can imagine a lot of calculation. So it becomes a data-driven business. So you need to measure, and then it becomes a data business. It becomes a data-centric problem. And once you measure, then you'll actually look at what are the strategies to cut down those emissions. You need to make investments in new sensor technologies. You need to install carbon capture facility. There are companies which are actually coming up with new machinery to capture the carbon or emissions in their facility, to dispose it in the right way. And then finally, also looking at the overall, how are they doing on the overall 2050 net zero outcomes?
That
it becomes a data-driven business, Alex. Yeah,
it's like knowing the data in each of those 3 pieces, those 3 phases. You say there's no way one could wrap your head around where all that comes in, and that's where you do need to use algorithms and machine learning to be able to find that.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. I can say that it is going to be a complex implementation, and there's also an urgency.
The thing about using machine learning, though, is it's hot to talk about, but not as easy to implement. For general engineers, for instance, like for them to be able to suddenly become data science experts. I mean, is that the expectation?
That's a super question, Alex. And if you look at it, in fact, yesterday I was having a conversation with a computational fluid dynamics expert in Houston. So imagine a very large network, let's say a water network, right? For example, from a water treatment facility for that water to reach your home, there are a lot of things which happens in between, isn't it? So there are a lot of networks which it has to pass. There are treatment facilities. There are pumps which actually help in delivering the requisite pressure at your home. You have valves. So you can imagine the complex. You might have certain heaters where you want to control the temperature of water, especially in colder regions. And on the network, you can imagine thousands of assets or equipments. It can fail anytime. And let's say, a data scientist wants to solve a problem in terms of, so let's say, this section of the network is going to come down. How is it going to affect the overall pressure on the overall network? Do we need to make any changes on the compressor? So it's going to be humanly impossible for data scientists to solve this problem. And that way I'm giving a very simple problem which you and I can relate to. But these problems have to be solved by experts. And it's very critical that these experts have to learn data science. There's no way some of these facilities are going to be managed without the core engineers behind these operations also leveraging data science for their operations. Otherwise, in fact, I can't name the customer, but I was having a conversation where this customer is managing a gas network. He was doing capacity planning for the network in terms of, hey, there's a new city which needs to be serviced through our network. So there's a new city where all the homes in that city have to be delivered. The gas has to be delivered. So what are the investments I need to be making in order to do that. He was saying, it's so complex, Srikanth. It's humanly impossible for someone to say this molecule is going to travel across this network and reach Alex's home. It cannot, it's gas, it's liquid. I don't think there's any technology in the world which actually can track every molecule of things which goes around on the network. He was saying I need tools to help me the cause and effect relationship on such a complex problem. Physics cannot solve it, unfortunately. There are tools which are there. And he was showing me examples of the inaccuracy which exists because of the sheer complexity. You need to consider the ambient conditions. You need to consider the complexity, the interrelationship between these equipments. So what I'm experiencing, Alex, is there are certain problems where data science is the only way to solve it. And, people who are experts have to be empowered. There's no way out.
So your focus then for Flutura is to basically empower these engineers to become data scientists, to be able to make it easier for them?
Yes. Some of these higher order problems, there's no way these experts cannot be kept out of the loop. So in fact, we are working with a refinery where coming back to the net zero problem, right? So they are seeing that the refinery is consuming more fuel in the last 3 years. Suddenly they've seen the fuel which they use for their furnace in the refinery is eating away a lot of gas. That means their expenses are going up. That means that your scope 2 exposure on emissions is going up. That means you're buying more gas. So that means that, again, it has an impact on your carbon footprint. And because of this, we are now helping them to figure out where exactly the problem is. So they have a heat exchanger train. So, many of the energy which is used is also recycled within the plant so that you use, you can buy less amount of fuel to support those operations. So that means that those recycling systems, which harness the energy which you already generate and use it back into your operations. So there are certain inefficiencies which are happening. But just imagine, someone, at least I'm not an expert on heat exchangers. It has to be an expert on heat exchangers. But if you want to answer the questions which I'm asking, you need to know data science. And hence, we are our entire product suite, Cerebra, which we call it, every day we spend a lot of effort in terms of how to simplify an engineer's life so that, these complex operations can be managed.
You painted a picture of the need for both the concept of yield and uptime, but this net zero outcomes from investors through governance to focus on it. But it's such a large problem, and only really data science and machine learning can play a role here. And now it's really a future where engineers, you're going to have, I think, what word you use, citizen data scientists, and then just more and more are going to be able to say, all right, we need to understand how to use this and have the right tools to make it happen. And I feel like I remember you mentioning your goal. What's your goal for 2024? Is that what it is?
So we want to deliver $1 billion of business outcomes to our customers. Secondly, also empower 100,000 industrial data scientists by 2024.
Wow, that's only 3 years away.
That's
coming up quick.
So we are working a lot in terms of a partner ecosystem, channels to scale effectively.
I love the goal, though. It sets the vision and where you guys are headed. Thank you so much, Sri, for sharing the journey that you have been on from that first initial coffee, and the mission that you're on and the goal that you're headed towards. For those that want to learn more, you can head over to their website. That is Flutura, correct? Flutura.com. That's Flutura.com to be able to explore it. Thanks so much, Sri, for your time.
Thank you, Alex. Pleasure.
And We'll see you all on the next episode of UpTech Report. Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.